Proverbs chapter 3, verses 1 through 9, I believe, or 1 through 10. My son, do not forget my law, but let your heart keep my commands. For length of days and long life and peace they will add to you. Let not mercy and truth forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart, and so find favor and high esteem in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Probably wonder where that scripture come from. Here it is. And in all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. It will be health to your flesh and strength to your bones. Honor the Lord with your possessions and with the first fruits of all of your increase. So your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will overflow with new wine. May the Lord's word be blessed. Well, we've been talking about the things in life that can get in the way. Let's open up the first time. Oh, there we go. And so we've been talking about all these things in our lives that will sometimes get in the way, and how Proverbs can help us to live a more connected life. We've just read out of Proverbs chapter 3, and it actually talks a little about the very issue today, which is about money. But I have a little video here I want to share with you. It's I found this on, I can't remember, it wasn't with Right Now Media, it was another venue. But anyhow, I stopped this video at about the 2 or 3 minute mark, because for the last part of it, he talks mostly on the environment and so forth. But I want you to see what this is, a worldly perspective on what they believe is the problem with consumerism.
Every day, Americans are bombarded with hundreds of messages suggesting that the good life is attainable through the goods life by making lots of money and spending it on products that claim to make us happy, loved, and esteemed. On the news shows, we hear a near constant refrain from economists and politicians about the importance of consumer spending and economic growth. And around $150 billion are spent most years to embed consumer messages in every conceivable space, from TV shows and websites to public bathrooms and escalator handrails. Lately, marketers have even been paying actors to drop sales pitches into conversations in bars and city parks. But commercialization and consumerism also reach deeper, worming their way into people's psyches and encouraging them to organize their lives around higher salaries and owning more stuff. Unfortunately, this can come at a high price for the well-being of both people and the planet. Research consistently shows that the more that people value materialistic aspirations and goals, the lower their happiness and life satisfaction, and the fewer pleasant emotions they experience day to day. Depression, anxiety, and substance abuse also tend to be higher among people who value the aims encouraged by consumer society. Strong materialistic values also influence our social relationships and thereby affect other people's well-being. Scientists have found that materialistic values and pro-social values are like a seesaw. As materialistic values go up, pro-social values tend to go down. This helps explain why people act in less empathic, generous, and cooperative ways when money is on it.
So again, the next part he starts talking about the whole issue of environmentalism and so forth, which was the main purpose of his video. But it just goes to show you that this is, even the world is recognizing that our desire for things is not really healthy. It drives us towards a disconnected lifestyle, and that's really the danger which I've been talking about for the last few weeks. Now, here's the thing. Our society promotes things over people, and a lot of times that things is just money. A good example of my own life, when I was just a young man, I was it was before I met Angel, so I was in my early 20s, and I was working at a car rental dealership, and I was the manager of the car rental place, and we had a customer who was dissatisfied, and she was not happy, and she really didn't have a leg to stand on, so to speak. She had blamed some things on me which weren't true, but the owner of the company sacrificed my integrity in order to get the money from her. Basically saying, well, you're right, he really messed up and he didn't do right, and so if you'll just pay us this amount instead of the full amount, then we'll be fine. And so for him, that was more important to him, was that money, rather than my own personal integrity. And I never forgot that lesson I learned from him. It was not a good lesson, but it's a lesson I've learned ever since. You know, one study suggested, I was reading this, I could not believe it. You know, we're on our phones all the time, and our computers and laptops and everything else. They say that we are exposed to 4,000 ads per day. 4,000! If you really think about it, anytime you get on Facebook, what's always scrolling on the right-hand side? It's a bunch of ads. There's ads within the Facebook. When you're online looking for something, if you're looking on Google, there's always a bunch of ads there. So 4,000 ads a day. This includes our TVs, our billboards that we have, radio, internet, social media. Now, here's the thing that really was crazy. Most business models now say that you need to spend between 8 and 12% of your gross income on advertising to make sure that your name is out there so everyone can see it. 8 to 12%, that just blows my mind. You see, what's at the heart of consumerism, or this desire for things, is that it's this desire for wanting things for ourselves. Now, this can lead to a very human-centered church as well. And I'll share with that in just a little bit. One that, here's what happens is sometimes we design a church that caters to our own personal needs, rather than what church is supposed to be about, which is to worship God. And that's a very grave danger, and it's a danger I think that many of us have seen in the church world today. And it's because we've decided to become focused on this rather than on people and rather on God's things. Now, I'm not a big fan of Russell Brand, but I think that this quote is very good. It says, "We continue to be spilled on by consumerism, even though we know it doesn't make us happy." All of us have experienced, oh man, when I was a kid, I got a BB gun, and after about a few weeks, it was no longer fun. It no longer made me happy. And in fact, I think I'm kind of convinced, and kids, this is not going to happen, I'm just telling you this, but I'm pretty much convinced that the best presents that kids could have would be the empty boxes that the toys came in. And I think that they have more fun with those empty boxes than they do with the toys. But it's not going to happen, just so you know, kids, you're going to get presents most likely this year. But you see, again, we talk about this, is it really truly just a problem of today? Well, I have a little article here. It's called "The Dark Reasons That Millennials Are So in Debt." And I thought it was really interesting. I'm not going to, of course, read the whole thing. It says, people between the ages of 24 and 35, which is those millennials, spend 141 minutes per day versus 100 on social media, rather than 105 minutes per day for those who are older. So those millennials are spending 2.5 hours per day on social media. So let that sink that in. 2.5 hours a day on social media. According to the data surveyed by more than 1,000 Americans by the financial firm of Charles Schwab, nearly half of the millennials, 49%, say their spending habits have been influenced by the photos and the experiences that their friends share on social media. Half of what they spend is focused on because of what their friends are doing. So I've seen all these deers being taken the last couple of days. I'm wondering when I'm going to be able to get my deer, but it's not going to happen this year. According to the 2018 survey of more than 2,000 millennials from a financial firm called Fidelity, roughly 2 in 3 millennials think that social media has a negative impact on their financial well-being, yet they still continue to do it. It's just crazy what we do. According to Alliance surveys, social media has become the millennials' financial Achilles heel. Younger adults who use social media are at the higher risk of depression, which we just saw up on the screen. And people who use it many different types of media sites are even at a higher risk of anxiety. So if you've got Twitter, Facebook, and Snapchat and all those other ones, the more likely that you are to be unhappy, the more that you have of them. So I thought that was pretty fantastic. I did not realize that was such a truth for us. So here's the thing. It is not something that's new. When we go back to Judges chapter 17, there's this really strange story about a priest, a traveling priest, and this family decides that they want to have a private priest, their own priest. So he's supposed to be for the community, but they instead hire him to work for them. And so here he is, he's working, and what has happened is that this family was obviously very wealthy if they can afford their own priest. And they bought this priest, and in fact there were some decisions, some idolatry that was going on within the home that even that priest became a part of. And he sacrificed his own religious integrity in order to stay at that home and be paid by that family. Sounds kind of familiar today where there's a lot of churches out there where these pastors write these books and make lots of money, and it seems like they're more focused on the money rather than on the business of God. So wealth became a priority for this family. And when idolatry came, that priest did not provide any sort of guidance to them because it was all focused on their personal desires. Even in Revelation, we have a story in chapter 3, verses 14 through 22, where it talks about this church in Laodicea. And it was a well-known church back then, a well-known city. It was very wealthy. In fact, it had a major earthquake just a few years before this that had basically destroyed the whole town. And the town was so wealthy, they did not need the Roman government to rebuild it. That's how wealthy they were. Extremely wealthy. And in fact, they were so wealthy that when John writes his letter to on Revelation to these churches, he tells them that you should either be cold or hot, but instead you are lukewarm. He says, I'd rather you be cold and so you're refreshing, or hot because you're passionate, but you're in the middle, you're lukewarm. And that had a very clear message for them. You see, Laodicea lay in an area where it relied on two different water sources. One came from a spring in another town that was a hot springs. And another came from a city up in the mountains that was cold water. But by the time it got to Laodicea, it was lukewarm. Both of them were. So it was a very clear picture for them to see this. It was like, wow, they were so wealthy that they didn't need any help, but yet they really didn't care. They were so self-reliant. And in fact, this is the church that actually gets most of the negative comments made about it by John in the book of Revelation. And so that's the thing that we need to be very careful about. God is calling us to be people that does not focus on this, that we will focus on healing. And instead of being rich, they were not poor in spirit. Because God doesn't want us to be focused on our wealth. He'd rather us be poor in spirit. Here's the truth. Here's the heart of this message. It's this. Man's ways hoard. God's ways stores treasure. I'm going to read Matthew chapter 6, verse 19 and 21, and I have a story to tell you about my trip I made a couple weeks ago. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth. This is Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21, where moth and rust will destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Last 2 weeks ago, Charles had to step in for me. I had flown to South Carolina to take care of my dad's estate. He had passed away in August. We thought that the will that he had there was the legal one, and so my cousin was going to be the executor and was going to take care of everything and didn't have to worry about anything. But then come to find out it was not a legal will. And so the last will that they had was one that I possessed from 2009, which made my sister and I executors. And I told her I would go ahead and take over and take care of it for her. So my goal was to fly there, grab the van that you guys see in front of my house, load it up with stuff that my siblings would want, and bring it back here to North Dakota and then give it to them later on. But when I got to my dad's house, I got done, and on Wednesday I went and took care of all the bank stuff and the death certificate stuff, and I went to the house to look at what was there. Now, the house itself had been pretty much cleaned out by my cousin, because he was truly a hoarder. It was just filled with junk, and almost all of it needed to be thrown away. But when I went out to his workshop, where he had all of his tools and everything, I sat there and I looked at all of these tools, and I knew my dad had tools, but nothing like what I saw. And I was overwhelmed. In fact, I had to say to my cousin, I've got to leave. I can't do this right now. Because I didn't have a plan. So he and I went back to his house, and I just sat there and like, what am I going to do? This is too much. And all this stuff belongs to my sister. My oldest sister was getting the van, my brother was getting some gems and stuff, and my other sister was getting all of his possessions in the house. And I didn't think it was fair for me just to leave it there. So I called up Charles, I asked him and the board if I could go ahead and stay for the next couple days, dealing with all that stuff, and then I was going to rent a trailer and fill it with all that stuff and take it to my sisters in Texas and in Colorado. When I started going through all that stuff, my dad had tools that were 2 or 3 times the same tool. 2 of them were still in the plastic wrapping. I'm like, oh my gosh, what in the world was my dad thinking? My dad was a single man, had been single for a good part of his life after he divorced my mom. He had 2 cars. He had a van and a Mustang. That van had 4,900 miles on it. It's a 2010. The Mustang was a 2014. It had 2,000 miles on it. I'm thinking, what in the world was my dad thinking? It's because he was so consumed. There were some areas in his life he was a real miser. But then other areas he just spent money like this. He had no need for 2 cars, especially if you're only driving them to the store and back. 10 years, 5,000 miles. I've driven more than half of that and taken it from South Carolina to here. It's got 7,700 miles on it now. It's starting to get old. But you see, that's the problem. My dad never learned that lesson. He was more about hoarding all these things. You see, Proverbs were provided for the very thing that this is. As we read in chapter 3, it's a wisdom literature. It provides us wisdom. The purpose is to give us proper responses in dealing with life issues. It helps us with our domestic stuff, helps us with business, helps us with our religious decisions, and it helps us even in our social world. You know, there are 7 books in the Bible that are considered wisdom literature. Proverbs just being one of them. And a third, now listen to this, a third of the entire Bible is written in poetic form. A third of it. All of your prophets, almost all of your prophets, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, and on throughout almost every book has some sort of poetry in it. And here's the thing, they were sayings, but they were more than sayings. They were short and easy to remember so that you could live them out. They were to give practical advice to each one of us. So again, as I read through it, now so what I do is each time I do a new message, I read the entire book again to focus only on those things that have to do with consumerism. As you can see, there was quite a few. Now there's actually quite a bit that talked about money, but I wasn't wanting to focus on money. I was more focused on what the heart of the matter is, which I shared earlier. So these are the ones that you can see here. It says, don't be enticed, value wisdom, be content, be generous, forsake foolishness and purity. And so when I went through them, you can see that as I went through and I marked them all off, which ones belong where, you can see that it was actually purity and being content were more than half of those that we responded to. And so as I looked at them, I was able to divide them up into 2 different areas again. Your attitude versus your action. And almost what I found out, this is very interesting, almost every single one of the things that we've been talking about for the last few weeks, and what we'll talk about next week, is having a pure heart. You see, most of it's been practical. If you've noticed that, most of the Proverbs were practical. But today, most of the Proverbs, right here, 3/4 of it, focus on your attitude. Because consumerism is about an attitude. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. It's a problem that all of us deal with. So whereas the other 2 messages were balanced or maybe leaned a little towards the practical, these focus totally on attitude. Pure heart, chapter 13, verse 25. The righteous eats to the satisfying of his soul, but the stomach of the wicked shall be in want. This has been a part of each week, this whole idea of pure heart. Be content, 14:14. The backslider in heart will be filled with his own ways, but a good man will be satisfied from above. We need to be satisfied with what God has provided for us. Some of us are rich. Good. Some of us are poor. Be content. That's good too. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes in our society we think those who are poor is because it's their own fault or whatever else, not realizing that sometimes people have chosen to live that sort of lifestyle. Value wisdom. 22:4 says, by humility and the fear of the Lord are riches and honor in life. Wisdom makes you prudent and cautious, mindful instead of wanting. This is obviously true for all the things that we're studying in this series. But there was a specific call to wisdom in order to avoid this trap of consumerism. So when it talks about the action now, what are some things that we can practically do? It says, don't be enticed. My son, as sinners entice you, do not consent. So are the ways of everyone who is greedy for gain. It takes away the life of its owner. Ooh, very interesting. Don't let the world take hold of your heart. Don't let it decide what you're going to do. The world is saying more, more, more. And God's trying to tell you, me, me, me. Forsake foolishness. Chapter 9. Come, eat of my bread and drink of the wine I have mixed. Forsake foolishness and live, and go in the way of understanding. Don't let the foolishness of this world pull you away from what God values the most. That's what I appreciate so much about what the kids said today. You know, a lot of times I would ask that question to kids and say, I'm going to buy me a BB gun, or I'm going to, you know, all of these things that you would hear. But they didn't. They said, you know, college education, a house, a car, things that are practical and important. So it says, forsake foolishness. And lastly, generosity. The generous soul will be made rich, and he who waters will be also watered himself. This is the active component that will prevent us from hoarding. Because when we give, we will not hoard. We will not be a passionate wanting of things. We're looking at our own needs instead of the needs of others. You know, Jesus wanted us to have a full life. In John chapter 4, verses 34, it says this. Jesus said to them, my food is to do the will of him who sent me, and to finish his work. Do not say, there will still be 4 months and then comes the harvest. Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look at the fields, for they are already white for harvest. And he who reaps receives a wage, and gathers fruit for eternal life, that both he who sows and he who reaps will rejoice together. For us up here, you do both of those. For in this the saying is true, one sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap that for which you have not labored. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labors. It's a wisdom of God that Jesus gave to each one of us. To sow and to reap and to be joyful in every part of what we play in that. Now for most of you that are farmers, you do both of that, I understand. But there are some of us that do come along when others have sown something and we reap the rewards of that. The focus needs to be not rather what we get, but rather how do we serve and how do we use others. Our actions speak to how we respond and how we deal with people. Here's the thing that I found out, this is very interesting. The average personal debt is up to $38,000. That does not include a home, by the way. Okay, so don't count your home, just personal debt is $38,000. Credit card debt is 25% of all debt. All debt, 25% is credit cards. 2 in 10 Americans spend 50 to 100% of their monthly income on debt repayment. College, home, car. And this is what's really scary. Personal debt has outpaced our personal income. It's now 6 times faster than our own income. Those of you, how many of you can remember Honeymooners, the show? Give Billy a raise your hand. Do you remember, if you really remember watching that show, where does the show take place for most of it? It takes place in the kitchen, right? Kitchen/living room, correct? Very rarely does it show anything else. And there's usually like 1 or 2 camera angles. And the camera maybe goes in and out, but for the most part, the camera stays there and the show happens and you just watch the show and you laugh and whatever else. Today, the camera angle changes or zooms in and out every 5 seconds on most of your shows. And we wonder why we can't have any attention. We have become very much attention deficit. And what it does is increases our impulse control. So therefore, we got to have it now. This lack of impulse control means that we go into debt at a much greater rate than our wages. And in fact, I just read another article that says most of the first world countries, people have more debt than they are worth. More debt than they are worth. So, from all of this, from reading out of John and Revelation and Proverbs, what are some practical skills that we can do? First of all, prioritize. Prioritize the things in your life. Don't just look, if you want to know what your priorities are, look to where your money goes. That tells you. Watch where your money goes. That tells you what's important in your life. Budget. Create a budget. Now, Dave Ramsey, if you ever heard of him, he has a budget, but he doesn't call it a budget, he calls it a spending plan. In other words, you tell your money what you want your money to do, which is a better attitude. And it has things like snowball repayment. So once you pay off a little debt, then you pay off the bigger debt, and the bigger debt, and eventually it snowballs off and you pay off all your debt. Do things with your hands. Do things, create events rather than the focus on gaining materials. I have this little video here just to share with you. So the question is, what would we do with that? You know, Luke and I this last summer, we coached kids. Had a great time doing it. Many of you are coaches here. Many of you are Meals on Wheels. These are the ways in which we can practically serve our community. And there's more and more ways to do that, to give of ourselves. You saw Aaron and the kids as they did a song, and they'll be doing a play here next couple for Christmas. And all the teachers that we have downstairs, these are ways in which we can focus on what's important, which is people. A couple weeks, the Gobles, they went to Kansas City to watch a game, and they went there and had a great time together. But they also do things like go hunting. You know, Dale and Vince went hunting, and then I know that Melissa and Vince went out together, and you guys got your deer together. Those are things that you will remember for a long time. When you take your kids out to go fishing, or when you go coaching basketball, or you go to a UND game, which, by the way, they won this weekend. Those are things that as a family you can share together and focus on the things that are important, which is family, spending time together rather than having all of these things. You see, this is it. This is the thing that's most important. It's time. It's not our money. Our mission statement tells us to not only to go, not only to love, but also to disciple others. And that means investing of our time and our talents towards others. Coaching kids, teaching Bible studies like Charles on Wednesday nights. We invest so much into our lives and so many other things. Now, I give this question every week. I don't know how many people of you participate in it, but I would really like you to do that this week. What is something that you had or have that you wish you never purchased or received? And I will share with you, my wife and I, remember, we have owned many homes over the years as we've moved around the states. And we bought a home in Springfield, Missouri. My wife was really excited about it because it had everything we needed, a big basement for our kids and their friends to be there, and had five-bedroom house. I mean, it was a big home. And it suited all our needs. But I was not comfortable with that house, and I never shared that with my wife. And that was a mistake on my part. That house ended up costing us tens of thousands of dollars. It was a huge mistake for us. We almost went bankrupt, but we were able to get out of it, pay off our bills. It took us 6 years to get out of that debt. But we made that decision to do that. It was something I wish we had never purchased. But it's past now. We've learned our lesson, hopefully. But think about that. Really talk about that with your family. What is something that you were given or you purchased that you wish you'd never had? Let's all stand as we sing, or we say the Our Father together. And really remember this part. Give us this day our daily bread. That's really the focus, is that we get. Remember, Jesus said to his disciples, he goes, this is what feeds me. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Remain standing as we sing this song, hymn 7.